Recently, I've noticed a trend of people trying to deny the fact of climate change, the idea that human activity is driving global temperatures up. And usually, people with this claim of some kind of ideological or political motive tend to deny this scientific fact. In this video, I hope to put the record straight. I'll demonstrate all the evidences for climate change, how we figured out how climate change works, the history of climate science, and how we can combat this kind of misinformation in the future, and how possibly, if we act fast, we can solve climate change. Ideally, something that affects all of humanity like this should not be a political issue. The laws of physics do not care who you vote for, and if we don't act fast, this could end up with a very significant impact to our way of life and our species, and it could very possibly lead to the complete extinction of our species altogether. Starting in the 1820s, which is really the heyday of the Industrial Revolution, which continued until around 1840. Then there were a series of other industrial revolutions which really aren't relevant here, but generally speaking, in the 1820s we started to understand the greenhouse effect, which means that the more carbon dioxide is accumulated in the atmosphere, the carbon dioxide, as opposed to other gases like oxygen and nitrogen, which just allow heat to pass through, carbon dioxide contains 3 atoms, right? And these atoms tend to vibrate, they sometimes dissipate heat, and then they send the heat in all directions. And a very large proportion of that heat, which is trapped and then sent in different directions by the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, is sent back to Earth, which heats up the surface and heats up humanity, and causes the melting of ice caps and the rising of sea levels. This is the general mechanism of climate change, and it was known since the 1820s. But it was only until 1896 that Arrhenius, a person whose name I probably just butchered, who was a Swedish physicist and chemist who proposed in 1896 that human-driven activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels, is going to be the main contributor to the increase of CO2 in the atmosphere. This was kind of controversial at the time, but it slowly began to be accepted. And in 1938, we definitively took records of the temperatures, and we looked at the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it was clear that there was a very heavy correlation. As the CO2 increased in the atmosphere, the temperature also increased. And so this was the basis of modern climate science. Denial of this science generally comes in many different flavors. Sometimes people say that CO2 increase in the atmosphere is natural and that it's caused by volcanoes. Some people claim that the Earth goes through different periods of temperature changes anyway, and that it's very natural for global warming to happen. Some people claim that the sun is causing the increase of the temperature, and this is not just fringe internet groups. Often people who promote this misinformation are extremely powerful politicians and people of that nature. If it were the case that the sun was causing the increase of temperatures, then we would see some kind of indication for why that's the case. We've looked at solar energy, we've looked at the position of Earth. Nothing would possibly indicate the reason why the sun would be somehow causing the heating up of the Earth. That's just not how orbital mechanics works. I mean, the Earth has orbited the sun for billions of years, and generally speaking, there's no significant change to cause any kind of shift in temperature. Also, if it was the sun that was causing global warming, the entire atmosphere would heat up. Okay, the upper atmosphere would heat up as well. But if it was human-driven burning of fossil fuels that was causing the heating up of the atmosphere, it would generally only affect the troposphere, while the upper atmosphere would probably cool down. And this is exactly what we see. The upper atmosphere is getting cooler and cooler, and the lower atmosphere, which affects us and humanity and civilization and actual inhabitants of Earth, is getting warmer. So I think that is the best evidence that human-driven activity is causing this increase in temperature, not the sun. There are some other claims as to why climate change is happening. Some people just completely deny climate change in general. They literally deny that there is an increase of temperature. And anyone from Europe knows how wrong that is. Recently in Germany, in the recent heat wave in Europe, there was the highest temperature ever recorded in Germany. I think that very much demonstrates how urgent this situation is. In a few decades, that'll get considerably worse. And by the time my generation, for example, ends, we will live in a barely habitable Earth if this continues. And many of the solutions exist for climate change, by the way. This isn't a doomsday scenario, and I don't really think there are any doomsday scenarios. I think that problems exist so that we as a species, as humans, can solve the problems. One possible solution is to invest in renewable energy. Renewable energy would decrease our reliance on fossil fuels, and eventually we can be able to control climate change if people are willing to accept that this is a real problem and we're willing to work on solutions. People should probably start to understand that renewable energy isn't a scam, although maybe some people are just in it for profit. But there is a genuine good idea behind this. Okay, I mean, for example, if we electrify our society and we start to rely on, say, electric vehicles or even solar-powered vehicles. And solar-powered energy, that would drastically decrease our reliance on fossil fuels. And eventually we won't have to burn these ancient plants full of carbon-12 into the atmosphere and basically kill ourselves and cause an earthly prison for us, a planetary prison. We won't have to do any of that, and we will be able to continue our species. Although major economies and industries will still depend on fossil fuels, we can slowly phase out these things in favor of nuclear energy, or electric energy, or renewable energy, and by adapting energy grids to this technology, we will slowly be able to adapt. But it will first we have to stop as a species denying that this is the case. And I don't know why some people, especially on social media, are committed to trying to mislead the public about this very unfortunate issue. And by the time that the public really understands that this is a problem and sees the direct effects of climate change, and literally will be able to see for themselves how hot it is outside and that the sea levels are rising, it will unfortunately be too late. So we have to start now, and we have to act now, and I hope that in this video I've probably convinced a few people who have previously fallen victim to people who have misled the public about climate change, and understand that it is a real problem, and that we can move forward from this, and that misinformation about the subject will be phased out. So thanks for watching. The next video of the Megha podcast will be on Friday next week, and this will be every week hopefully. So I'll generally talk about science, technology, engineering and mathematics. I only started this last week, so I hope to continue it. Thank you.